Y detrás de esta tremenda imagen de todas estas personas bajando, saltando y tocando.
That one city, barely larger than Manhattan, could trigger the biggest political crisis Europe has faced in years. A city where thousands of desperate people are rushing toward a single border. A city where every hour is changing the future of an entire continent. And a city that has pushed Italy's Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, to make a threat that many thought would be unthinkable. What if Europe's border-free dream is beginning to crack? Because that's exactly what some leaders fear. But here's the strange part. This crisis isn't happening in Italy. It isn't even happening on mainland Spain. It's unfolding in Ceuta, a tiny piece of Spain sitting on the northern coast of Africa. And somehow what happens inside this small territory could reshape migration policy, border security, and political alliances across Europe. So here's the question. How can one small border create a crisis big enough to shake the entire European Union? At first glance, it looks like another migration story. Thousands of people, crowded border crossings, emergency responders, political arguments. But look a little closer, and you'll find something much bigger. Because behind the headlines lies a complex web of geopolitics, national security, European law, and a decades-old territorial dispute. A crisis where every government seems to have a different version of the truth, and where one wrong decision could have consequences far beyond Spain. Over the next few minutes, we're going to answer some difficult questions. Why did so many migrants suddenly arrive in Ceuta? Why is Italy blaming Spain instead of focusing only on the migration itself? What role does Morocco play behind the scenes? And most importantly, is this simply another migration crisis? Or is Europe witnessing the first warning sign that the Schengen system, the foundation of free movement across much of Europe, is coming under unprecedented pressure? Because by the end of this documentary, you'll see why this story isn't just about one border. It's about the future of Europe itself. Let's begin where the crisis truly starts, with a tiny strip of land that most of the world had never heard of, until now. Imagine standing in Africa, then taking just a few steps, and suddenly finding yourself inside the European Union. It sounds impossible, but that's exactly what makes Ceuta one of the most unusual places on Earth. Geographically, Ceuta is in North Africa. Politically, it belongs to Spain. And because Spain is a member of the European Union, Ceuta serves as one of Europe's southernmost front doors. For decades, this tiny territory has existed at the center of a geopolitical tug-of-war. Spain calls it sovereign Spanish territory. Morocco has long argued that Ceuta should be part of Morocco. That disagreement has never truly disappeared. It has simply remained beneath the surface, waiting for moments like this. And then, everything changed. In what authorities described as one of the most dramatic migration surges in recent memory, enormous numbers of migrants headed toward Ceuta in a remarkably short period. Some approached the border on foot. Others attempted dangerous sea crossings. Emergency services were stretched. Security forces rushed to contain the situation. Within hours, images from Ceuta were spreading across television screens and social media around the world. To some, these scenes reflected a humanitarian tragedy. To others, they signaled a serious border security emergency. And as the crisis intensified, another question began echoing across Europe. How could this happen so quickly? Was this simply a spontaneous movement of desperate people? Or were deeper political and regional forces also at work? At that moment, no one seemed to have a clear answer. At first, it's easy to assume this is only Spain's problem. But that's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Because Ceuta isn't just Spain's border. It's also one of the European Union's external borders. That means when pressure builds here, the consequences can ripple across the entire continent. Migration has long been one of Europe's most divisive political issues. Some governments argue for stronger border controls. Others emphasize humanitarian responsibilities and international law. Every new crisis revives the same difficult debate. How can Europe protect its borders while also responding to people fleeing conflict, poverty, or instability? And this time, that debate was about to become even more intense. Because one European leader wasn't willing to stay silent. A leader who believed this crisis threatened more than just one border. A leader who warned that Europe itself could be at risk. Her name, Giorgia Meloni. And what she said next would send shockwaves through European politics. As Europe watched the images coming out of Ceuta, one leader responded faster and more forcefully than almost anyone expected. Italy's Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni. For years, Meloni has argued that Europe's external borders are only as strong as their weakest point. And in her view, what was happening in Ceuta wasn't just Spain's problem anymore. It was becoming Europe's problem. Because if one external border comes under intense pressure, the effects don't necessarily stop there. The political debate quickly shifted from one simple question, how do we help Ceuta, to a much bigger one. Can Europe's border system still withstand crises like this? That is why Meloni's warning immediately captured headlines across Europe, not because it targeted Spain alone, but because it challenged one of the European Union's most important achievements, free movement across much of Europe. And suddenly, the conversation was no longer only about migrants. It had become a debate about the future of European unity itself. Spain, however, saw the situation very differently. Spanish officials insisted they were working to restore order, strengthen border security, and coordinate with neighboring Morocco. From Madrid's perspective, this was an extraordinary emergency, not proof that Spain had abandoned its responsibilities. Spanish leaders also warned against turning a humanitarian crisis into a political weapon. Because every major migration emergency presents governments with impossible choices. Increase security, protect human lives, maintain international obligations, and prevent political instability, all at the same time. It's a balance that few countries have ever managed perfectly. But while Spain defended its actions, another country remained impossible to ignore. A country that wasn't inside the European Union, yet played a crucial role in everything happening on the ground. Morocco. Look at any map, and one fact becomes immediately clear. Every person attempting to reach Ceuta from Africa must first pass through Morocco. That reality has made Morocco one of Europe's most important partners on migration. For years, European governments in Morocco have worked together on border management, security cooperation, and efforts to reduce irregular migration. Whenever that cooperation is strong, migration pressure often decreases. When tensions rise, the entire region can become far more difficult to manage. And that's exactly why analysts across Europe began asking the same question. Was this crisis simply the result of desperate people seeking a better future? Or had deeper political tensions made an already fragile situation even more explosive? The answer is far more complicated than many headlines suggest. Because to understand why this crisis has shaken Europe so deeply, you first have to understand one idea, a system that millions of Europeans take for granted every single day, the Schengen Area. And once you understand how that system works, you'll finally see why this crisis has become about far more than one small city on Africa's northern coast. To understand why this crisis has alarmed European leaders, we need to understand one word, Schengen. For decades, the Schengen Area has allowed people to travel across much of Europe without routine passport checks at internal borders. For millions of Europeans, crossing from one country to another can feel almost as easy as driving into the next state. It became one of the European Union's greatest symbols of unity. But that freedom depends on one critical assumption, that every country protecting the EU's external borders is able to keep those borders secure. Because if the external border fails, trust between member states begins to weaken. And once trust begins to disappear, countries start asking a difficult question. Should we restore our own border controls? That is the fear at the heart of this debate. Not simply migration, but whether confidence in Europe's border system can survive repeated crises. This brings us back to Giorgia Meloni. Her message wasn't simply about one city or 1 week of migration pressure. It reflected a broader political argument she has made for years, that Europe must strengthen its external borders if it wants to preserve free movement inside Europe. Supporters say tougher border policies are necessary to maintain public confidence and keep the Schengen system functioning. Critics argue that migration crises require shared European solutions, humanitarian protections, and cooperation, not unilateral political pressure. Both sides agree on one thing: the stakes are enormous. Because once countries begin questioning the rules that have defined Europe for decades, the political consequences can extend far beyond a single border crossing. So, was this crisis really just about Ceuta? No, Ceuta became the spark. The real story is about something much larger. It's about how Europe responds when migration, national security, humanitarian concerns and politics collide at the same time. It's about the difficult balance between protecting borders while respecting human dignity. It's about cooperation between Spain, Morocco, Italy, and the rest of the European Union. And it's about whether Europe's leaders can find common ground before temporary crises evolve into long-term political divisions. The images from Ceuta may eventually disappear from the headlines, but the questions they raised: who should protect Europe's borders? How should migration be managed? And how much pressure can the Schengen system withstand? Those questions are unlikely to disappear anytime soon, because sometimes history doesn't begin with a massive war or a dramatic summit. Sometimes it begins at a small border crossing that most of the world had never noticed, until one day, everyone did.